I made 3 times more money this past year than I've made in my entire life, just utilizing what I know. But it took me till I was 30 years old that I really realized that sales was my calling. And I saw my dad taken away in a straitjacket. And I figured, what's going on? He went away for 6 months. And my mom looked at me when I'm going through all this. He was in and out of hospitals. And she said, David, I need your help. I need you to help your dad get into a hospital to get well. She was diagnosed as schizophrenic paranoia. I used to say, why me? All of a sudden, my sister, my dad. And then when everything they passed, it took me a while to realize why, and why you're here, what your calling is.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest today. His name is David DeRazzi, and he was born in a small suburb community of Los Angeles, California, called Eagle Rock. Even though of that background, David has encountered many difficult things in his life, including a father, Tony DeRazzi, who was a TV star who struggled from mental illness, as well as his sister, Kathy O'Dare, who was a TV star on the big TV hit pilot, Happy Days. In 1974, she even started the Brady Bunch, etc. And her life was plagued with mental illness. Now, David went on to be an award-winning salesperson for multiple Fortune 500 companies. But he attributes being a caretaker of both his dad and his sister to helping with that role. And that's what we're going to delve in today. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Doctor. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, you grew up as a young man in the LA area, and you loved that stuff.
Oh, I really did. Everything happens in LA and Hollywood. And I was a big part of that growing up with a father that had his own TV show for 6 years. And my sister became a movie star at a young age of 11. She got her first break, and it was a fun life.
Well, that's great. Now, when did you decide to go into sales?
Well, I decided what's interesting with all this stuff that went on in my life, and I decided to go into sales when I was about 30 years old, but I did a lot of things. Ever since the age of 9, I was a super newspaper boy. And, I went to school to become a dentist, went to UC Irvine, and got my degree, got married, had a couple of kids, but it took me till I was 30 years old that I really realized that sales was my calling. I grew up watching my dad, who after his TV career got into sales and was a super salesman. He set records selling cars when he was doing part-time acting after his TV show. And I realized that's my calling. And I've been at the top 2% of every company I ever worked with since. And that's how I got interested, and I haven't stopped. At the age of 70, I'm still going strong. I made 3 times more money this past year than I've made in my entire life, just utilizing what I know.
That's fantastic. And it's wonderful when you meet your calling in life. You know that calling, and you find that calling to be something you're very successful at.
That is so true. I mean, I see all these people. I look back in high school. I remember the one time I was in the 9th grade. This 7th and 8th grade, I struggled because I was going through all this stuff with my dad being sick. And then in the 9th grade, I found sports. And I'll never forget this. One guy offered me a pill, a red, back then. And he says, hey, Dave, this will make you feel good. And I think about that decision. I said, no, I'm not interested. And I kind of, I laid off all that stuff. I saw a lot of my friends go the wrong direction, but I found sports and I was inspired. When my dad was going through all this mental stuff, the football team on my senior year voted me the most inspirational player on the team. And then I went to the reunion, my 50-year reunion, maybe about 6 months ago. And everybody there says, I read your story. He says, I had no idea that was going on in your family at that time. So I learned a lot from it, and I channeled I realized that I'm here for a reason. And I followed through on all that. And it's been very rewarding.
So how were you able to manage to live a normal life with mentally ill people around you on a daily basis?
Well, I've heard you say before in some of your interviews, everybody in this world is in denial, but I jump right in. I mean, at the age of 14, at the age of 7, I saw my dad taken away in a straitjacket. And I figured, what's going on? He went away for 6 months. But at 14, my mom looked at me when I'm going through all this. He was in and out of hospitals. And she said, David, I need help. I need you to help your dad get into a hospital to get well. And I go, Mom, what do you want me to do? She'd take him to the doctor. So I could never, I remember sitting in that chair, looking at my dad. And my dad said, what should I do, David? Here I was 14. I said, Dad, we love you. I says, you got to get better. And from that day forward, I realized that my calling was become a caretaker of his. But I managed to get through all that because my mom was I trusted my mom, because every time I talked to her, she said, you're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. And she was my motivator. And it's funny, as I got older in life and sold, I always call her when I made a big deal. She'd always say, where's your next one? You know, I mean, I just love what I did, and I managed through it. And it was tough, but
now mental illness is a buzzword for many, many things. What did your father suffer from?
He suffered from manic depressive bipolar. He was after 6 months in the hospital when I was 7 years old. I never forget. He'd come home and he would sleep for 12 hours, 14 hours a day. But when he was in his high cycle, we used to call it his high cycle, and my friends would come around, they thought he was the most fun dad in the universe. He'd stay up all night. It's tough. They're either giving everything away, spending all their money. I mean, one cycle, he actually took off and signed up to build a pool in our backyard. I'll never forget that. We didn't have the money for a pool, but I enjoyed it. I became a super swimmer. I won big awards as a swimmer in high school because of that. But you just never know. But we got through it, you know.
Now, was Kathy O'Dare similarly affected?
Kathy O'Dare, my sister, she started going to acting classes at 3 years old in Hollywood, California, with stars like Mark Hamill and other big people on big TV shows in that time. And my mom managed to keep her away from all these things my dad was going through. What's interesting, because he'd have these cycles and stuff like that, she'd go to the interviews and my mom would manage to keep him away from anything to do with Hollywood. She got her first break when she was 11. And, Richard Donner was her director. He did Superman and all those big movies, Lethal Weapon, but he took a liking to her. But she managed to keep her away from that. So even till when she got the big part, out of 400 girls on Happy Days for that one part in the pilot. And my dad was never on set. So it made a big difference not having to have my dad there, because my dad would stir things up, especially when you're manic depressive bipolar. You don't know what direction they're going to go. They're like a firecracker. They could go from low to high overnight.
And it's sad, but some of the most creative, talented people in the world are manic depressive.
So true. I mean, you look at Adam Carter, that big movie star, and Jonathan Winters, who my dad was on the show, all in Dean Martin show. That was one of his biggest things he wrote about, having lunch with Dean Martin. And Jonathan Winters was on the show too, and he talked about, his mental illness, and he was bipolar and manic depressive. And at that time, they came out with lithium, and that seemed to be the best thing at that time. And I guess people are still using it. But even when I went through therapy through the years, I went to the therapist and she says, maybe you're borderline. That's why you're a great salesman, because I've never suffered. Thank God that I never suffered from mental illness, but I just enjoy life and I'm on the edge all the time and I don't stop. That's one of the things through the years that I may have struggled with, is finding that balance, because I'd work 2 and 3 jobs. I'd keep selling that, even when I had the job with the big corporate companies. So it's just finding the balance. That's the tough thing in life.
Well, what was it like growing up with a Hollywood starlet sister? And how were you able to help her when she struggled with mental illness? It
was really neat growing up with a Hollywood star sister. And the way I was able to help her, when it started all happening when she was like 18, 19, she started falling into this trap after her really great TV career. And she went to Hawaii one time and she came back and we didn't know when she went by herself, but she had a traumatic experience there with 2 gentlemen. And she came back and she drove to San Francisco, and my cousin found her and he put her in a mental hospital. She was diagnosed as schizophrenic paranoia. And so the way I was able to help her when she was 18 and 19, I was able to help my mom put her in and out of these different apartments. She managed to get through school, but then in her later life, she managed between 20 and 39. She actually had a child, but in her later life, when she hit 39 to her 52, when she passed, she was in and out of halfway homes. This is like assisted living where they keep people drugged up and things of that nature. And a lot of those stories are in the book that I wrote. And I was able to talk with her. I guess I was able to engage with her, talk to her every week. I'd go visit and have lunch with her every couple of weeks. And we'd talk about things. We'd laugh. She had a great sense of humor. And until the day she passed, I was always there for her to try to give us the most normal life she could. And a lot of times she would be zoned out, but I'd bring her back. I'd say, one of the experiences that I did, I said, Kathy, that's not real. You said you have children by all these musicians, Don Henley, David Lee Roth. I said, you couldn't be married to these people and have 3 kids. And she looked at me and says, yeah, Dave, I think you might be right. I never had a church wedding with any of them. I said, I guess not. So I was able to be there for her. I think the whole thing is you got to be there for them. And I was able to be there for my sister. I loved her. And we were always family. And who else can they turn to if they can't turn to their family and friends? I felt special.
And how were you there for your father?
Pardon me?
How were you there for your father?
I was there for my father. One of the things I used to do with my dad, and you wonder, how do you engage with a father that's, had 5 nervous breakdowns, 37 shock treatments. He used to, when he didn't sleep in those days, I used to get up at 3:00 in the morning and go into his art studio behind our garage. He had his own art studio and he used to paint and draw. Well, that's the only time I'd get to talk to my dad. So I'd get out and I'd paint with him. It was fun. And then he ended up gaining my trust since the age of 14. And I was able to, when he went through one of these issues, I'd sit down and talk to him and try to reason with him, because he always reasoned with me. So at those times he was out of control. And I kind of said, look, you got to balance yourself, Dad. And, many times I talked him into getting help and make sure he take his meds.
Well, that's part of knowing what is real and what is not real. Is that how you made some of your biggest breakthroughs, both in your career and your family?
Yes, that's a good point. That's what I did. I realized that everything I learned and listened to throughout my life, that you're going to apply it somewhere. And what's one thing I'll never forget. I was, when I was super sales, number one Merck pharmaceutical, number one pharmaceutical company in the world, Fortune 500. I was number one in the whole company. And I'll forget, they were thinking about making me a manager. I'll never forget, the president of the company says, Dave, why don't you stay and keep what you're doing? Because the more you know, the more power you're going to have. and the stronger you're going to be at whatever you do. And I go, plus you're going to make 3 times as much money. And it's interesting. Even to this day, like I said, this past year, I've done better than I ever have. And I realize that's true. There's so many, learning is power. And I've learned a lot, and I'm going to share it in my next book.
Your next book? What's your next book going to be on?
The next book, and I've already started, is going to how to be at the top 2% in sales, whatever company you work for, and manage to stay there. And I got a lot of things. I've started writing them down. Well, you've written books. You know what it's like. You start writing down, I'm mapping it out, I'm outlining it, and I'm going to keep going. I got a lot to share. You know, you put 70 years, and I'll never forget Og Mandino when I used to listen to him. Do you ever remember Og Mandino?
Yes.
The writer, the world's greatest salesman. He said, you're not here that long. And at that time, the average age was 70. Well, I've already hit 70. So I know I've learned a lot in all those years, and I want to share it with the world and make their life better and have a fantastic life, not to, just like your book says. Yeah.
Well, that's important. And it's interesting how these things are there in our background, but it's for us to put the pieces together to forge ahead despite the difficulties we have.
I agree. I used to be driving home from work thinking, I have these friends in life that they have their families. They seem like the perfect family. One of my best friends, everything was perfect in their life. And I used to say, why me? All of a sudden, my sister, my dad. I had another brother that was 82 that just passed a couple of years ago. He was somewhat autistic, but he got by. And my other brother had encephalitis. He died at 39. He couldn't walk till he was 3. But my mom used to call me the golden boy, and I couldn't figure it out. I used to ask him, why me, Greg? Why all this stuff with me? And then when everything they passed, it took me a while to realize why and why you're here. What your calling is. So I think that's a great point.
That's good. Can you give our salespeople out there some tips on how to be great salespeople?
I think I definitely can, Doctor. I think, first of all, one of the biggest things I've done for the years is make your top 10 list. In other words, every year, I'm a goal person. I grew up in the era of Zig Ziglar, Dennis Waitley, Tony, all those people, all those motivational people. And I think make your target. When I first started with Merck, they said, make your target 25. I mean, be realistic. Make your top 10 targets and look at them. And if you get a no and some guy just says, no, I don't want to deal with you anymore, you replace it. You got to have your pipeline. And I felt that every time I'd hit 3 or 4 of those top 10 every year, I'd be on the top of the company. That's one of the things. And I think it's critical to network and I save all my business cards. I'm talking nearly 35 years of all my business cards. And you stay in touch one way or the other with all those people because you never know where they're going to be or where you're going to be. And I think that's a key factor.
I think that's key. How do you deal with the no?
Well, how do I deal with the no? That's a great question. I really don't. When I hear a no, it doesn't mean no. I'm sure you've heard that before. Because until they say, I don't want to talk to you anymore, that's a no. I'm done, Dave. I don't want to talk, but that hasn't happened very often because if you talk to people, one of the things I learned in sales too, one of the other tips is don't ever when you're top 10 or, your top targets, don't ever let 2 weeks go by without touching them some way. If it's sending them some article on something, just emailing them, just touch them some way because they're going to, all of a sudden you might find that little niche of what they're really interested in. The old story was you go in their office, you look on the wall, they got a baseball or football player and all that. But there's more to it, The last one of the companies I interviewed with, he said, don't talk about the stuff on my wall. Let's talk about what you can do for me. I'll never forget that. So
for sure. So now this show is called the How to Live a Fantastic Life show, David. How do you live a fantastic life?
How I live a fantastic life. I find things to do when I like to write. So I love that. I got into magic about 18 years ago, and I'm a magician, a member magician at the Magic Castle Academy of Magical Arts in Hollywood. So I go there every Monday night and have a good time, do a little magic. I like golf, I love baseball, and I help people. I help people in need when I can. And even my sons, I've been blessed with 4 sons. My son ended up having a friend that, he was addicted, and he had helped put him away a few weeks back. So when I could be there and help people, I try to get involved as much as people will let me in their lives, and use my experience to help them from what I learned, trying to be a mentor for those people that need a mentor. And it's very fulfilling, and I enjoy still working. I have people that I work with, I love being with younger people, and, they can share their thoughts, and they respect you and listen to your wisdom, and it makes me feel good. I know I've done very well. I had my president of the company I currently represent. He said, Durazi, what do you do? He says, our company increased profits 20% last year, and it's a multi-million-dollar company. He says, you were a big part of it. And I go, hey, I just go out there and love what I do. I love to sell, and I'm successful at it, and I give people what they want, and I have fun doing it.
Excellent. How do you recommend others live a fantastic life?
I recommend others live a fantastic life. Be aware of what happens every day. When you get up every morning, just be thankful that you're here, and just don't let the day waste away. I'm an early bird. I get up early every day. I got friends that are in my age group in their 70s, and they sleep in, they get up 11 or 12 o'clock. You kind of wonder, even my father was sick, and you wonder, in the early morning, there's so many things you see that other people don't see. Kick off the day, and just, do what your passion is. That's the key to life, to live a fantastic life. It took me till I was 30 years old, and then I became the top of everything I was doing. I was working part-time and helping people with telephone directories when they were around, when I had my corporate jobs. And I mean, go out and do what you love to do. My dad used to sell, after his TV career, after his nervous breakdowns, he used to sell pens and pencils and whatever it is. And I realized, and that was one of the first things I sold on the site too, is pens, pencils, calendars. And I realized, but it took me so long to realize, but 30 years old, it was nearly 35 years. And it's fantastic. That's how I've lived my fantastic life. I got a great family. Stay in touch with the family. Find that balance. Don't get too spread out, because, in the last 10 years, I've kind of zeroed in on one particular thing. I was able to write these books, which has been very fulfilling. And I was able to, I still am living a fantastic life. I exercise 5 days a week. So you got to be physically straight and mentally straight. And I think as long as you do that and realize what you've learned and what you could share, you can live a fantastic life.
Great. Now, how can people get in touch with you and find out more about your books?
I have a website, www.davidfborazi. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter, and I do blogs every so often on my website. And eventually I'll do speaking, but right now I'm going to get this next book off the ground. But it's a great book. They'll love it. And it's a great story. And it took me 3 years. It took me 6 years for the first one. And I really got to learn about my sister and my dad more than I ever knew when I was growing up. And, I learned things that my dad did that I didn't even know what was going on when it happened. One of the things that happened with my dad, all of a sudden, when I was 16, he called up one day. I was at home. He said, David, bring me some dry shoes and my dry suit in the garage. And I go, what? So anyway, I did. He was at a real estate office where he was working part-time, and I brought the suit. And I never asked any questions because it wasn't a thing you asked your dad. What happened? So I read in his journals and notes, all of a sudden he says he was going over to a lady's house to paint her, and he fell into a swimming pool because he met her in an art class, but he loved to paint and draw. And I would have never known what happened. It's amazing what you find out. And when you find out a family has journals and things that they were willing to share with. He wanted to write a book, and I wrote his book. So what a more fulfilling thing. I saw him write it when I was a kid.
Excellent, David. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you, Doctor. It's been enjoyable. I really appreciate being here and look forward to hearing more of your radio shows and podcasts and interviews. You're a very interesting and motivational person, and I definitely will follow you.
Thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, check out my website, Dr. Alan Lycka, DRALLEN, Lycka, LYCKA.com. And there you can get a golden pearl each and every week. Thank you very much and have a fantastic day.
Thank you.